Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today to talk about this super relevant topic right now, social isolation, specific to really addressing the impact on caregivers and individuals living with dementia. My name is Jenna Fink, and I work with the Alzheimer's Association, Minnesota, North Dakota chapter. My title is Senior Community Services Manager. And under that role, I'm often talking with individuals calling our 24/7 helpline, as well as just people calling to learn a little bit more about what is dementia. How do I kind of approach these challenging situations? How do I respond to these challenging situations? And really, what are some community resources? So under that role, this question, how do I better understand this social impact, of social isolation, is coming up quite a bit given our 2020 pandemic. So we'll dive a little bit deeper into that today. Something that I often find helpful first is to kind of give a brief dementia overview. Just to kind of break it down to the basics here, dementia is a general term. It is not a diagnosis. They are not used interchangeably, dementia and Alzheimer's disease, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But dementia, like I said, is a very general term. It's kind of like an umbrella term. Dementia is caused by damage to the brain cells, which then affect the ability for someone to be independent, continue maybe living, alone, and that because it affects that judgment. Loss of functioning in two or more areas are this kind of, encapsulates what dementia is. And those areas can include memory, language skills, visual perception, and the ability to focus and pay attention, as well as judgment and such. Loss of brain function is severe enough to affect everyday activities and tasks with dementia. It's not something that is just a kind of a here and there situation. Oftentimes we will go into the kitchen and we'll think, well, what did I go into the kitchen for? What was I doing in here again? And then you kind of step back and you go into a different room and then you remember, oh yeah, I was going to get this. Well, with dementia, you don't necessarily remember, or you remember much later on. It doesn't come quickly back to you. And again, it can affect daily living to the extent of happening regularly, that memory loss happening regularly, word finding difficulty happening regularly, forgetting family member or other loved ones' names, those things that are really abnormal to daily living. And then I wanted to note here too that dementia is not a normal part of aging. It's kind of this misunderstanding, among maybe society, thinking, oh, that person is just getting old, they're forgetting things, but really that is not a normal part of aging. If someone's memory or judgment, recall abilities are being affected regularly, daily, and multiple times a day. So I like this visual, and briefly, this is just kind of a nice visual of better understanding the effects of dementia on thinking. And this will tie into some of those social isolation topics that we're going to talk about a little bit later. So how it affects, a person's thought or cognition or, really just being in decision making. It affects judgment, attention, perception of a situation, but also visual perception as well. Reasoning, organization, abstraction. So really thinking about those abstract or those really challenging, kind of problem-solving situations. Language, and of course, most commonly, which people refer to, dementia as being a memory loss. I like this visual as well because again, it kind of puts dementia in that very general, category and siphons it out. I think I'd mentioned, under that umbrella term of dementia, another way to think about it is that dementia could be comparable to the term flower. So flower is a very general term, but then you have roses and you have daisies and you have petunias. There's all these different types of flowers. Same thing with dementia. general category, but then there's different types of dementia, and those are shown on the screen here, such as Alzheimer's disease, vascular dementia, mixed dementia, dementia with Lewy bodies, and frontotemporal lobe dementia. So to tie into into all of this, the impact of social isolation and those communication challenges. So for example, word finding difficulty or missing words is very common with this disease. So the person with dementia might kind of pull back from some of those social settings, whether that's in person, which obviously is a little more challenging in and of itself right now, but could also be pulling back from those social settings of phone, Skype or virtual communication as well, or texting. There could be more repetition to the questions that someone might be asking. And again, if they're kind of getting that sense or that feeling that I'm either asking the same question because I can't remember, what that answer was, or I don't even remember that I asked that question before. Or additionally, if they're getting the sense that, hey, this person seems to kind of be getting annoyed with me. Again, they might be pulling back from those social situations and communicating with people in general. With the disease too, there's a loss of reading and writing ability, especially as the disease progresses. So that can make communication, with others really difficult. Reverting back to native languages. And that more often happens in the later stages of the disease or middle stages of the disease. But there can be that reverting back to a native language. So again, kind of mixing words, kind of a combination of a native language with English and that, which can obviously affect communication. Really just even tracking conversations can be quite difficult for people with dementia as the disease progresses. There could be difficulty with just tracking a part of a conversation, or tracking that I had a conversation with someone about a topic an hour ago. Right now, the inability to see people's faces with the PPE requirements that we have, that's getting to be really difficult, because as you think about, when you're talking to people, you're often looking at people's lips just for that kind of confirmation of what they're saying, and it's normal to see all of our, our whole face. And now when we're covered up with our, facial masks and that and other PPE, that can be really distracting. So a person might not feel quite as focused on, what that communication is, how a person is engaging with another person, as well as just becoming difficult to track because you can't see that person's mouth. And then, of course, there's these changes in how visits are taking place. And that's a huge communication challenge right now, right? We can't communicate the way that we did a year ago, where if you want to go and kind of connect and go have lunch, and sit side by side next to someone, all of this in the communication sense is so drastically different now with this 2020 pandemic. So how does the pandemic really affect dementia-related behaviors? We talked a little bit about that PPE, that unfamiliarity with that it's not a regular kind of normal part. This is really quite new for us of wearing that. Additionally, fear. Right now, there is a lot of discomfort and anxiety and fear, associated with this pandemic. And all of that can really kind of ruminate in anyone, but with someone with dementia, it can come out in a dementia-related behavior. Depression as well, and that's something that we're seeing much more of at this point in time. Difficulty expressing thoughts or feelings. So a person with dementia may not be able to get out exactly the words that they want to express in being able to say, I'm having a hard time, or, I don't understand quite what's going on. I know that there seems to be some illness, but why is everyone doing this? Do I need to wear like a hazmat? Like, is this really something that I can't leave for? I mean, there's a lot of thought, obviously, that comes into expressing one's feelings and that. And when the disease is present, it makes it a lot more difficult to fully express oneself. Over and under stimulation. I think that right now this is kind of one of those unique times where there's both, this overstimulation of there's so much information, there's so much news that's kind of coming at us, but additionally this understimulation of we're not doing the things that we would normally do. We're much more isolated as a society right now, and understandably so, but over and under stimulation can also increase those dementia-related behaviors, making it more difficult, with social interactions, social engagement, and more difficult for the caregiver. Loneliness, pretty common right now, that isolation that's taking place. Changes in routine, which again, like we talked about, is very common. And then just general frustration, that frustration of, well, I want to go out and I want to do things. Right now I'm kind of struggling myself with just this idea of, we've been doing this for 6 months and this is now just the weight of that. Well, again, with someone with dementia, it may be more difficult to understand why we're doing these precautions, why we're doing these things, and really the extent of that, and kind of managing mental health too. Responding to dementia-related behaviors as a caregiver. So kind of this different view. We were talking a lot about the person with dementia, and we still will be, however, really addressing now this caregiver role. So it's important for caregivers to remember that behavior is a form of nonverbal communication. Anything that's being expressed, any dementia-related behaviors such as pacing, wandering, kind of moving about the house, and that all of that is trying to tell a caregiver something. So it's about identifying what that is. These dementia-related behaviors are often a response to communicate a feeling or a need. So kind of playing detective to find out what that is. A response may include asking repetitive questions about COVID-19 or becoming very agitated or emotional. And that's that response from the person with dementia's perspective. So as a caregiver, really being there to be that support, that care, that caring role, for that person to decrease that stress and that agitation, which then decreases the behavior. And really, it's important for caregivers to attempt to understand what the person living with dementia is trying to communicate. Again, kind of playing that detective role, finding out, what's going on. Are there any triggers? Oftentimes in conversations with people, this is where we're talking about maybe a behavior modification tool of better understanding, what is this tracking, that we can identify when a behavior happens, what happens before it. So talking about the importance of social engagement related to dementia. So what we know is that social engagement is associated with living longer with fewer disabilities. It's good for us. It is important for us to socialize with others, to have that connectedness. Staying engaged in one's community offers the opportunity to feel invested, valued, and maintains those social skills. And one's community can mean the community in kind of the greater sense, but also community in that smaller sense of your community of friends, your community of supports. And remaining socially active supports brain health. A lot goes into communication, and I think that it's so kind of natural to us, obviously, this communication, but there's a lot that happens. There's that tracking of a conversation, finding your words, managing multiple thoughts at the same time. So a lot goes into communication, which then also helps to kind of stimulate your brain, use your brain, which builds confidence, builds those kind of firing neurons, and that to only help support one's brain health. So what we don't know the impact of this 2020 pandemic on brain health and social health related to dementia. That is a big question from a lot of people right now, in asking, well, what does this mean? What's going to happen? How are people with dementia being affected? We know, like we talked about from the beginning of the slide here, that social engagement and communication is extremely important. But what we don't know is really how this pandemic right now and taking that away specifically right now is going to affect later on. I'm sure studies will be done. So some caregiving tips to reduce the social impact of COVID-19. As a caregiver, it's helpful in you feeling that connectedness as well with the person with dementia or just the person that you're with, to join them at their level. If they're sitting, you sit. If they're standing, you stand. Just having that moment of really being at the same level builds that connectedness, builds that that feeling of rapport, and strengthens that communication. Engaging the person in communication. With dementia in the later stages, that may be more difficult, given that this is a progressive disease and language skills become more and more diminished as the disease does progress. But really trying where you're able to engage the person in conversation, engage the person in that activity that you're doing to help support, that social component, that feeling of connectedness, and reduce that feeling of isolation. Be mindful of body language, both yours and theirs. Of course, we want to maintain a social distancing guideline, but not important to not show that fear in your interaction with them. So if someone were to reach out and touch you, important to not, kind of react and become afraid, but instead kind of mimicking and mirroring, what is maybe more appropriate touching, or what is appropriate, distance away from someone can go a long way. Provide only a brief update or conversation regarding COVID-19, as this may increase that person's anxiety. So as the caregiver, you may be hearing that question a lot of, from that person of what's going on with the virus, what's going on with the virus. And while you want to help reduce that person's anxiety by providing some information, it's also important to not give a lot of details, to not add a lot to that conversation. Kind of picking in your head what is either that 1 or 2 sentence response that I'm going to say, so that you can just continue to repeat that to have that continuity in your message, but also getting them the information that they need for that moment. Have topics to talk about or activity ideas in mind ahead of time. This can really help reduce that stress on the caregiver to think ahead of time of what can I do with that person? What's an activity, so that when you are waking up in the day and kind of starting your day, you're not all of a sudden, boom, trying to think of that activity, maybe thinking ahead. So the night before, kind of creating a routine list, a structure to the day is important. Structure is great. So creating some sort of kind of activity list for your day, as well as if you are going to go visit someone, if you're going to go visit someone in a care facility, kind of thinking ahead of time about what you're going to do, what topics you might be talking about, so that isn't then a lot of work when you're in the moment to try to figure out. If you're asked why you don't visit, provide brief explanations and then that emotional support. So that might be a question as a caregiver that you're getting. And I mean, in normal times, those are tough questions sometimes of why don't you visit? You should be visiting more. I miss you. I want to see you. But especially now, when with this pandemic, it's sometimes impossible or very difficult to do that. So my recommendation oftentimes to individuals and caregivers is, to provide that brief explanation, but more so that's that support afterwards. So I put an example here of, I would love to visit more, but there's this virus going around and I don't want you or I to get sick. And then thereafter, providing some sort of emotional support of, I really wish I could visit more often too, or I miss you too. Remember when, kind of going to another conversation can also help as well, that kind of redirective tool. So caregiving tips to reduce the behavior impacts of COVID-19. It's important for caregivers in reducing your own stress, of all of this to consider some of these things for the person with dementia. So it's important to rule out that pain or discomfort, any thirst or hunger or need to use the bathroom, because all of those can increase dementia-related behaviors. Acknowledge and join the person's reality, really putting that support, into your conversation with them, into that time with them, will make it easier. Consider any environmental triggers, and that's where that behavior modification log can be helpful. But just identifying what may have been a trigger maybe to a behavior can help you as a caregiver to reduce your stress in knowing what that trigger is and trying to reduce that in that person's daily routine. Reapproaching as needed. There's such an importance on this of that, if something doesn't work, it's okay to try it again later. Providing that reapproach technique can really be helpful to reduce that, stress or those behaviors associated with the disease. Consider topics of conversation that create a positive response for the person. So again, kind of thinking ahead of time, what are those topics that someone enjoys talking about? The grandkids, the fishing days, the fishing story. What are those topics that are enjoyable that help boost that person's mood and create that engagement, really get them engaged? And just as a reminder, putting the person before the task. Anytime that we can, kind of create an activity or a conversation that's meaningful to that person, that's where you're really gonna succeed and have that positive engagement for both you and them. How people living with dementia may respond during a pandemic. So this list is by no means comprehensive. None of these lists are, none of these necessarily are comprehensive because we're all individuals and we all have our own different preferences. But these are some reactions that people with dementia may have during this pandemic season. So increased sensitivity to stress or trauma, and that can be past stress and trauma or current stress and trauma. Limited ability to understand directions or explanations. If we're kind of thinking about ourselves, maybe you as a healthy caregiver, when you're stressed, we're just not on our A game. We're not firing on all cylinders. Same goes for someone with dementia, but they're also competing against the dementia as well with understanding and following those directions. Again, the person might forget instructions more easily, things that may be, kind of considered more normal for them to be able to follow might be more difficult. More easily agitated, frustrated, or overwhelmed, just again, because of all of the stimulation or lack of stimulation that's coming at them. There, of course, is that increased risk for isolation. That one is pretty obvious right now. And then increased risk for wandering as well. And that wandering or that pacing, wandering is a behavior that is telling you something. If someone is kind of pacing around the home, they might be looking for something. They might be, kind of in this time of so much uncertainty. They might be going from room to room just to feel more comfortable because things feel really heightened right now. So that might be your cue as a caregiver then to kind of stop. Try to engage that person in one activity, just in one conversation, to try to lower their anxiety and decrease that to help them kind of come back to more of a baseline. Tips for engaging the person with dementia in meaningful activities. I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but that meaningful activity engagement is so important because we all want to feel important in our community. And again, community can mean greater community. It can mean that community of support, of family and friend, community of home. But we all want to feel, important and that we're doing good. Keep skills and abilities in mind. As a caregiver, as you're kind of thinking about the person with dementia and what are different things that they can do, because again, your routine has changed, that individual might not have the support coming into the home or of them going out of the home like they did before. So in thinking about these tasks or activities, keeping their skills and abilities in mind. Encouraging involvement in daily life activities, such as putting the dishes away, setting the table, folding laundry, helping out with household tasks and chores, going out into the lawn and picking up sticks before mowing the lawn, those sorts of things. It's important to consider those things. Ask for their help, engage them during the day, during maybe one of those like unplanned activities that you might have. But asking for their help, again, makes them feel like they're important, that they're involved, and they are important. They are an active part of that involvement in the home and the support of the home. Considering their favorites, another good way to engage. So favorite music, favorite food, anything like that that can really engage them and get them really connected in the conversation right from the get-go, or connected into the activity from the get-go, is a good thing. Important to focus on enjoyment and not achievement. Thinking about this kind of goes back to that thinking about the task. Thinking about the task for that person's enjoyment, for that person's just general pleasure in that, not for actually completing the whole task or doing the task 100% right. Important to be flexible. Easier said than done right now when we're being so incredibly flexible with not really having maybe a structured routine like we normally do, but it's important to have that reminder. And then considering independent activities for that individual as well as partner activities, because you as a caregiver need to have that time for yourself as well. You are still important. This is a very different time where there is a lot of focus, on the person with dementia, and how do I engage that person? How do I, have those meaningful activities, structured for them? Don't forget about yourself. And then I have this reminder at the bottom of this that if you're needing ideas, for what can I do? How can I need some ideas of how to engage this person during the day. I'm running out of ideas. Give our 24/7 helpline a call. We are here to talk about all of those kind of challenges that are going on right now. That's primarily what we're hearing from our helpline callers, is that we're needing these ideas. I don't know how to handle this situation because I've never been in this situation. And that's what our helpline is there for, to help support you and kind of get you connected to other local resources and connected to other ideas. So some support tips for you as a caregiver. Practice self-care. Again, I was talking about the importance of that, and that while there's a lot of focus on the person with dementia, that does not mean that it's time to not focus on you. Practice self-care. Write it into your calendar. Put something into your phone or your iPad's calendar to pop up and remind you to do something. Schedule those activities for yourself during the day. Seek support, from family, friends, support groups. Our Alzheimer's Association has many virtual support groups right now, knowing that in-person meetings are not wise, not recommended right now. Our association has really changed with that recommendation. So we're offering many of our education classes and support groups virtually. This might be a time to consider counseling as well if you feel like you're struggling and needing to talk to someone more regularly for that regular support. Encourage communication between caregivers and or those facility staff. If a person is living at home, there may be one caregiver, there might be multiple caregivers, but encouraging that communication between those people that are providing that support is only going to help decrease any anxiety and stress under the caregiving role, because there's that open communication already there. Same goes for if an individual is living in a facility, just keeping that open communication among staff. Knowledge is power. It's important right now to kind of get as much information as you can, while also putting up that guard when you need it. But knowledge is power when it comes to dementia. Better understanding what's going on is going to help you decrease your stress, because you already have maybe that forethought of, okay, I figured this may have been coming, or, oh, I read about that, this is normal. So this is a good time to attend some of our virtual online classes, to start seeking out some of that information if you haven't already, just to kind of help equip yourself with that knowledge. Consider other ways that other people can help, such as taking the trash out to the curb. These don't have to be big ideas. You know, if a neighbor is asking, hey, how can I help you out? Or they've offered before, or if they haven't offered, but that they're taking their trash out too in the morning. Is that something that maybe they could do if you left it out? Picking up groceries, calling to talk to a person, with dementia. If you're a support to someone with dementia, a support to a caregiver, calling to talk to that person with dementia or that caregiver as well. Additionally to that, kind of the alternative side is asking others to call and talk to that person with dementia. So asking the neighbor maybe to do a socially distant, little visit outside in your yard, or asking, someone to call during the day to give you that time to yourself because that person is engaged in another activity. And then, like I mentioned before, those socially distanced outdoor visits. Talking with the primary caregiver or facility about preferred ways to interact with the person. Again, kind of if you are a family member, not one of the primary caregivers, talking with that primary caregiver about, what is the best way, what is the most supportive way, to connect with that person that also supports that primary caregiver. Is that the phone? Does it seem to be text messages, texting pictures, those virtual visits, window visits? Just keeping that communication open to talk about those things is a huge support for that primary caregiver. And then recognizing that difficult decisions may still need to be made. And this is a hard one, because that's something that in our calls from our 24/7 helpline, people are calling and recognizing that I can't do this alone. The supports that I once had, I no longer have. Family coming in, friends maybe coming in. So, kind of coming to that idea that some difficult decisions may still need to be made, as far as bringing more support into the home, potentially a move, changing up a routine that's been a routine for years, all of that. Just wanting to note here that we have our 24/7 helpline is available, but there's other resources as well. This kind of topic of social isolation is very obviously much bigger than dementia and the caregiver and that. So I wanted to note that the National Alliance on Mental Health is an excellent resource for those mental health resources, for getting that support for yourself. Area agencies on aging within your state or your area, another excellent resource to find more community-based services. And then state agencies such as the Department of Health and Public Health. Obviously, they are reliable sources for some information there. So ways that you can get involved with our association. We have a plethora of opportunities, but I just wanted to note a couple here. Becoming an advocate, sharing your story. During this time, this is tough. And so becoming an advocate and sharing kind of your experience and what challenges you're experiencing will help us in state legislature, and in federal legislature as well. Create a team and join the fight against Alzheimer's. This year, after a lot of conversations, we will still be having our Walk to End Alzheimer's. It's going to look very different. We won't be gathering in large spaces, but we are still walking. And the longest day as well, which is that day, June 21st, it was this year, of the most light. And then volunteering. Volunteering is an excellent way to share your experience, share your hope, share your passion for ending this disease, sharing to that honoring or memorial of someone's life. Uh, Donations, we're a 501c3, so we're looking, for any donations that that are of interest for you to send to our association to continue the work that we're doing out in communities and building that awareness of this need. As well as we have a shop for the cause where you can purchase items, anything from t-shirts to, I think, shoelaces. So all sorts of goodies that go then to support our work. Wanted to finish up with this slide here, of ways to get connected with us. Again, I've been mentioning our 24/7 helpline number, and that's this 1-800-272-3900. We're here for you anytime. You will always be able to talk to a live person about your situation right away, to be able to start getting those resources when it's convenient for you, or start getting those ideas when it's convenient for you, whether it's noon on a Tuesday or midnight on a Sunday. It doesn't matter. Of course, we have various ways as well. Our website is a wealth of information for you from just a ton of topics, as well as that's our connection to ways to get, I should say, that's the way to get connected to community education resources that are going on virtually right now, as well as support groups in your area. So know that our association is here for you, as you're managing through, muddling through maybe this season of life, and we want to be here to help support you and help identify ways, of tips, strategies, ideas, as well as community resources to reduce that impact of socialization on caregivers and individuals with dementia. So thank you again for your interest in this topic today, and please feel free to reach out to us as needed. Thank you.